Emma could barely keep herself upright as she stepped out of the sleek glass building of the cosmetics company in downtown New York. The workday had drained her completely. Endless product inspections, formulating new recipes, and heated negotiations with suppliers had become her daily grind. The weight of responsibility rested squarely on her shoulders, and she had grown accustomed to it over time. As she trudged toward the bus stop, her mind automatically ticked off the days until payday, her thoughts a familiar loop of worries: the mortgage, her daughter, and James. With a weary sigh, Emma reflected on her husband, who had once been a robust, cheerful man full of energy. Now, he seemed like a mere shadow of his former self. After losing his job due to health issues, the entire burden of supporting the family had fallen on her. At first, she held on to hope that it was temporary, that James would pull through and find some way to contribute, even if it was something small. But as the years dragged on, nothing changed. Finally reaching her apartment building, she dragged herself up the stairs, each step heavier than the last, and unlocked the door. The place was eerily quiet. As expected, James was sprawled on the couch in the living room, his eyes glued to the TV screen, probably binge-watching some rerun of a sitcom. "Hey there," she muttered, shrugging off her coat and hanging it by the door. "Hey," he grunted back, not even bothering to look her way. Just another typical evening, she thought bitterly. Emma shuffled to the kitchen, flipped on the electric kettle for a quick cup of tea, and let her mind wander. James hadn't always been like this. Back in the day, right after high school, he'd skipped college, eager to jump into the workforce. He enrolled in a vocational program, trained as a driver, and landed a job with the city bus service. At first, he drove local routes, navigating the busy streets of New York, but later upgraded his license for long-haul trips. He used to love the job, the open road, the ever-changing scenery, and the chance to see new places beyond the city skyline. But his body couldn't keep up. Years of sitting for hours on end, the constant jolts of the bus, grabbing greasy fast food like burgers and fries on the go, and never getting enough sleep took their toll. By the time he was 38, he ended up in the hospital with excruciating back pain. Then came the heart scare. Doctors warned him repeatedly to switch careers, but James stubbornly clung to the only life he knew. Eventually, the pain became so severe that even basic movement was a struggle. It was around that time that his mother, Mrs. Elizabeth, a high-ranking official at a social services foundation, stepped in and helped him file for disability benefits. Emma accepted it as an unavoidable reality. She truly believed James couldn't work anymore, especially when he kept complaining about how he couldn't sit, stand, or walk for long without agony. Since then, she had taken on every responsibility: bills, groceries, meds, you name it. Mrs. Elizabeth, a woman with an iron will, had dedicated her life to looking after her son, and now she seemed to expect Emma to carry on that duty without question. "You're not taking good enough care of James, darling," she'd say almost every time they spoke, her tone sharp over the phone or during her unannounced visits with a casserole in hand. "He needs your support, your attention." Emma bit her tongue, though frustration simmered inside her. Support? She worked grueling hours every day, paid for everything, made sure there was food on the table, sometimes just throwing together a quick mac and cheese after a long shift, and kept up with the mortgage. Meanwhile, James did little more than grumble about his lot in life. But to her mother-in-law, that didn't seem to count. "Do you have any idea how hard this is on him emotionally, dear?" Mrs. Elizabeth would press, her voice tinged with reproach. "You could at least cook him something nice once in a while. Maybe a hearty meatloaf or apple pie, instead of those rushed dinners." Emma clenched her jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. as if she had the energy to whip up comfort food after a 10-hour workday. Ever since Mrs. Elizabeth secured disability for James, he had completely checked out, showing no interest in finding any kind of work, not even something remote from home, and instead, wallowing in complaints about his situation. Yet, Mrs. Elizabeth kept hammering the same point. "He's disabled, Emma. You've got to be there for him. Show some compassion. You're his wife, after all." At the same time, she conveniently ignored how James made no effort to stay active, didn't bother with physical therapy to strengthen his muscles, and never even considered looking into online gigs or part-time options that could accommodate his condition. Every single day, James followed the same routine. He'd step out for a solitary walk as per his doctor's orders, spending about an hour and a half to 2 hours wandering the neighborhood, only to return home, collapse onto the couch, and switch on the TV for endless hours of reruns. Emma, on the other hand, had long adapted to a life of constant hustle. She'd drag herself out of bed at the crack of dawn, head off to her grueling job, and come back late in the evening to a house full of never-ending chores, laundry, bills, and prepping meals like meatloaf or mac and cheese for the next day. Years ago, during a rare moment of conversation at the factory, her boss, Mr. Robert, brought up the topic of company-sponsored retreats to wellness resorts, a perk offered annually to top-performing employees. With a kind smile, he handed her a folder filled with details about the available destinations, saying, "Hey, Emma, you've earned a break. Your work is always top-notch. Take this chance to recharge." Emma barely glanced at the papers before sliding them back across his desk. A vacation felt like a distant fantasy, something she couldn't afford to even dream about, not when James relied on her for everything at home. But then, a different thought struck her. "Could I sign this up for my husband instead?" she asked hesitantly. Mr. Robert raised an eyebrow in surprise, but gave a slow nod. Emma explained that James had been battling serious health issues, and a stay at a resort might do wonders for his recovery. And so, a pattern emerged. Almost every year, she'd request the retreat spot not for herself, but for James. He'd head off for treatment, while deep down, Emma clung to a flicker of hope that these trips would make a difference, that he'd come back feeling stronger, maybe even motivated enough to pick up a part-time gig at the local hardware store or diner. Yet, each time he returned, the cycle repeated itself. James would grumble that the resort was a complete waste of time, that nothing ever helped, and that the doctors were clueless. He'd flop back onto the couch, mutter complaints about how unfair life was, and remain entirely dependent on her. Still, Emma held on to hope, even as it grew thinner with each passing year. One busy afternoon at work, Mr. Robert called her into his office, his face lit up with excitement. He wasted no time in sharing the news. There was an incredible opportunity for her. A month-long business trip to New York to work at one of the leading cosmetic manufacturing plants, with all expenses covered, a generous stipend, and best of all, the chance to bring Sophie along, enrolling her in a school tied to the embassy. Emma listened intently, but instead of excitement, a heavy knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. She knew this was the kind of break any professional in her field would kill for. New York meant prestige, new horizons, a shot at a completely different life. But her thoughts instantly drifted to James. He couldn't manage without her. He wasn't working, wouldn't even think to grab groceries from the corner store on his own. Who would look after him? The answer was painfully clear. With a quiet sigh, she murmured, "I can't." A wave of heaviness settled over her as soon as the word left her lips. She knew she was doing the right thing, but it brought no comfort, no sense of relief. Stepping out of the office, she paused by the window, staring out at the dreary, overcast cityscape. Somewhere out there, beyond the gray, was a world of possibilities. a world that wasn't meant for her. Duty weighed her down. She couldn't abandon James. She simply didn't have the right to walk away. But then, one ordinary day, Emma's world tilted on its axis. She came home earlier than usual in the middle of the day after a meeting got canceled. As she shrugged off her coat, James poked his head out from the living room. "Hey, the delivery guy just showed up with those headphones for Sophie." "He's waiting downstairs," he said casually. Emma nodded absent-mindedly, already mentally running through the list of tasks for the evening. But before she could say anything, James was already pulling on his jacket. "Don't worry, I've got it," he muttered, heading out the door toward the elevator. Emma turned and made her way to the kitchen, pausing for a moment to wonder if this small act, something as simple as picking up a package, could be a sign of something shifting, however slightly, in their routine. In the kitchen sink, a towering pile of dirty dishes awaited attention. Sophie had rushed off to school in the morning, and James had enjoyed his lunch, but, naturally, didn't bother to clean up after himself. Emma sighed, grabbed a sponge, and turned on the faucet, only to be met with an unexpectedly strong stream of water that splashed everywhere, soaking the counter and even hitting the screen of James's phone, which lay carelessly beside the sink. A few stray droplets triggered the touchscreen, and just then, the device buzzed to life with a notification, a voice message from Mrs. Elizabeth. Emma had no intention of listening in, but as she reached to move the phone out of harm's way, her soapy fingers accidentally tapped the play button, and the message started. "Hey there, Jimmy. Why the big rush? I'm really not thrilled about this plan of yours to move Olivia in with you. I've got a bad feeling about it, you know? It's just not good for you. All of this nonsense." Emma froze in place, her hand hovering over the sudsy water. Olivia? Who on earth was Olivia? Her heart started pounding, a tight knot forming in her chest, as she slowly turned her gaze to the phone. Just 2 days ago, she'd gifted James this shiny new smartphone for his birthday, complete with a custom case she'd picked out herself. And if her memory served her right, he hadn't even set up a passcode yet. Hesitating for only a moment, she picked up the device, wiped her hands on a nearby dish towel, and opened the messaging app. Scrolling through the chat history, she began listening to the earlier voice notes. The first one was from James, recorded that very morning. "Hey Mom, Olivia is just amazing. I'm head over heels for her. I want her to move in with me. I've got it all figured out. Emma told me she's passing on that big trip to New York, but I'm gonna push her to reconsider. It's our golden opportunity, and it'll be a huge boost for her career. Honestly, she'll probably thank me later for encouraging her to focus on herself for once, instead of always worrying about me." Emma sank onto a nearby stool, her fingers growing cold as the words sank in. The next message was from Mrs. Elizabeth, her tone sharp and disapproving. "James, you know how much I can't stand that wife of yours. But you've got to realize, if Emma finds out you've brought another woman into your home while she's away on a business trip, you're done for." Then came James's reply, his voice dripping with casual dismissal. "Mom, why do you always have to make a big deal out of everything? Neither of us talks to the neighbors anyway. We'll just live quietly in the apartment, and Emma will keep sending money from New York like clockwork. Well, to me, of course, though really, it'll be for me and Olivia to enjoy." His chuckle at the end was almost mocking, as if the whole situation was some kind of twisted joke. Another message followed from Mrs. Elizabeth, her irritation clear. "Are you out of your mind, James? You can't keep something like this under wraps forever. When Emma finds out, you'll be left with nothing. Do you really think they'll extend your disability benefits next year? I'm not even sure I can pull strings again. If that falls through, you'll have to get off your backside and find a real job. Emma thinks you're genuinely disabled. She has no clue it's all thanks to my connections that you've got those papers and can sit around doing nothing." Then there was a message from James to Sophie, his tone cold and calculated. "Whatever, I don't care. I'll take her to court and get half the house, then slap her with alimony claims on top of that. I'm disabled, right? Let her work harder to support Sophie, and me and Olivia while she's at it." His voice was steady, almost businesslike, as if he were discussing a mundane project rather than the destruction of his family. The last message was the one that had started this unraveling nightmare. Emma leaned back against the counter, the weight of it all crashing down on her. In mere minutes, everything she'd believed in, her marriage, her sacrifices, her trust, had shattered like cheap glass. She stumbled out of the kitchen, barely noticing the tremor in her hands or the half-eaten peanut butter and jelly sandwich, Sophie's favorite, still sitting on the table from breakfast. Her entire life had morphed into a cruel lie in the blink of an eye. She'd spent years thinking James couldn't work due to his condition, but now it was painfully clear. He simply didn't want to. As she stood there, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower only deepened the surreal emptiness inside her. A stark contrast to the cozy Sunday barbecues or casual "hey buddy" greetings she'd grown used to in their suburban neighborhood. How had she missed the signs, even when they were right in front of her, hidden behind every forced smile and empty promise? Emma had always believed that he appreciated her unwavering support, but in truth, he was desperate to be rid of her, leaving her drowning in debt while draining every last penny from her. She had clung to the idea of having a family, yet to them, she was nothing more than a cash cow to be milked dry. Her chest tightened with a suffocating ache, and in a sudden burst of resolve, she snatched her phone from the table and stormed out of the apartment, her heart pounding. As she hurried down the creaky stairs of her old building, she scrolled through her call log with trembling fingers until she found Mr. Roberts' number and hit dial, barely able to steady her breath. "Hey, Emma, is everything okay?" His voice came through, laced with genuine concern, as if he could sense the storm brewing on her end. She took a deep, shaky breath, steadying herself against the cold metal railing of the stairwell. "I'm in," she exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm heading to New York. I'm glad to hear that." "No need for extra questions," he replied with a calm assurance. "We'll get all the paperwork sorted out first thing tomorrow." Emma ended the call and felt a shift deep within her, like a weight lifting off her shoulders. She was done sacrificing herself for others. New York became her fresh start, her new home. Landing a job at a thriving cosmetics firm filled her with excitement, and opportunities seemed to unfold before her like never before. Her daughter, Sophie, adjusted quickly to the international school, making friends and embracing life with a bright smile, often coming home with stories of her new pals over a shared plate of mac and cheese. And then there was Mr. Robert, who treated her with kindness and respect. Over time, Emma saw beyond his role as her boss, recognizing a steady, dependable man who truly understood her. Just 2 months after her move, during a quiet evening stroll through Central Park, he proposed, and she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. Yet one unresolved matter lingered like a dark cloud. Through a lawyer, Emma filed for divorce. As expected, James put up a fight, demanding his share of their apartment, spinning tales of being disabled and unable to survive without a roof over his head. His bravado crumbled, though, when Emma's lawyer coolly pointed out that any court battle would inevitably question the legitimacy of his disability claims. James tried to push back, but Mrs. Elizabeth saw the writing on the wall. She knew all too well that if an investigation dug deeper, it could spell disaster for both of them. "Sign the papers, unless you want us both behind bars," she snapped at her son, her jaw tight with frustration, as she stood in her kitchen stirring a pot of chili for dinner. The legal battle didn't go in James's favor. Emma's attorney presented airtight evidence that she alone had made every mortgage payment over the years, often scraping by while juggling bills and groceries like a weekly game of Tetris. The court ordered James to cover the remaining debt. Since he insisted on claiming his share of the apartment, it was put up for sale, and he clung to the hope that after the split, he'd have at least a small sum to start over. But once the numbers were crunched, it became clear that nearly all of his portion went straight to the bank to settle the outstanding loan. Emma returned to New York, ready to build her new life, while James was left with nothing. He couldn't wrap his head around how it had all slipped away. Not long ago, he had a cozy home, a wife who looked after him, and a sense of security about the future. Now gone, like the last slice of apple pie at a family cookout. Standing at his mother's doorstep with a worn-out suitcase in hand, he felt smaller than ever. Mrs. Elizabeth opened the door, gave him a long, cold stare from head to toe, then turned on her heel and disappeared into the dim hallway of her apartment without a word. "Mom, I've got nowhere else to go," he mumbled, shuffling in behind her, his voice heavy with desperation. "That's your mess to clean up," she shot back, her tone sharp as she flicked on the TV, settling into her recliner with a glass of sweet tea. "I thought you'd have my back." He trailed off, hoping for a shred of sympathy. "I've done more than enough for you," she said, her voice icy and distant, almost like she was speaking to a stranger. "And look where that got us." James sank into a chair at the cluttered dining table, his hands gripping his head as a dull ringing filled his ears. Once, he had been the center of his mother's world, her pride and joy, the son she'd built dreams around. She had guided him, helped him carve out a life, pushed him to aim high. Now, he was nothing but a burden, even to her. No job, no money, no prospects, just the bitter taste of failure as he sat there, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. James had taken a job on a construction site, diving into the kind of grueling manual labor he once looked down on with disdain. These days, his physical condition had taken a serious hit. His back ached constantly, the pain so intense it was hard to bear, yet he couldn't afford to stop. Quitting meant going hungry, plain and simple. Each evening, he dragged himself back to the tiny room in his mother's cramped apartment, exhausted to the bone. She didn't even bother to leave him a plate of food, not even a simple sandwich or a bowl of leftover chili. Their conversations had dwindled to nothing. The silence between them spoke louder than words. He was no longer the son she boasted about to her friends over coffee. Meanwhile, Emma was carving out a completely fresh start for herself. After moving back to New York, she initially felt weighed down by lingering sadness, a shadow of her past life. But with each passing day, she could feel the burden lifting, bit by bit. For the first time in years, she wasn't tethered to someone who took her for granted, and that freedom was liberating. By her side was Mr. Robert, a man of quiet strength, thoughtful and dependable. He never pushed her or rushed things. He simply stayed close, a steady presence. He'd invite her for leisurely strolls through the city at dusk, guiding her down charming side streets and pointing out little diners where they could grab a hot cocoa or a slice of classic New York cheesecake. With him, everything felt surprisingly effortless, a stark contrast to the struggles she'd known before. Once a skeptic of second chances and fairy tale endings, she now found herself looking into his eyes and feeling certain she'd finally made the right call. How would you handle things if you were in Emma's shoes? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Your input means a lot to us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you tomorrow.